It started like any other Sunday dinner. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and that gravy my daughter Emily used to beg for when she was little. She came over with her boyfriend, Ryan, the one who barely looks up from his phone. I was just happy she came, honestly. Lately she's been too busy, as she says, with work and life. We sat down, and for a while, it almost felt normal. She told me about some marketing project she was leading. Ryan nodded along, and I smiled, proud even though I barely understood half the terms she was throwing around. Then she said something. I can't even remember what led up to it, but it was like a switch flipped. She rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, you wouldn't get it. You've been out of touch for years. You're just so old-fashioned. Honestly, it's kind of pathetic." Just like that, Ryan's fork froze midair, and I just sat there, stunned. The word pathetic echoed in my head. I laughed it off, that nervous little laugh people do when they're trying not to cry, and said, "Well, I guess I'm just a relic then." But she didn't even flinch. She smirked. "Exactly," she said. I stared at her. This woman who used to cling to my leg in grocery stores, who cried if I left the room too long, who used to call me her best friend, and I barely recognized her. I tried to keep it civil. "Emily, you don't need to talk to me like that," I said quietly. She sighed, leaned back and said, "Mom, it's not an insult. It's just, you're stuck. You don't do anything. You just sit here in this house like life's over." I wanted to defend myself, tell her about the garden I planted, the volunteering I started, the books I've been reading. But suddenly, all of it felt so small, like she'd taken a flashlight and shown me just how invisible I'd become in her eyes. When Ryan excused himself to the bathroom, I whispered, "Do you really think I'm pathetic, Emily?" She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I think you gave up a long time ago." Something in me cracked then, quiet, not dramatic, but deep. I just nodded and said, "I see." We finished dinner in silence. I offered pie. She said she was watching her calories. They left early. When the door closed behind her, I stood at the table for a long time. Her plate was still half full, and I remember thinking, I'd spent the whole day cooking for someone who couldn't even taste the effort anymore. That night, I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat on the couch, staring at the wall, thinking, maybe she's right. Maybe I did give up. But deep down, something else whispered. Or maybe she has no idea who I still am. The next morning, I woke up with that word echoing in my head. Pathetic. It wasn't just a word. It was the way she said it, like she'd been thinking it for a long time and finally decided to spit it out. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush hanging out of my mouth, and tried to see what she saw. Grey roots showing, wrinkles I hadn't noticed before, a robe I've had since her father was still alive. Yeah, maybe I did look like someone who'd given up. But what hurt most wasn't what she said, it was that she believed it. My own daughter. The girl I worked double shifts for, who I stayed up all night with during her panic attacks, who I made birthday cakes shaped like castles for when we barely had money for flour. And now I was pathetic. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, every second of it. The way Ryan didn't say a word, how she smirked after she said it. That smirk burned into me. It was the same one her father used to have right before he'd say something cruel and call it just being honest. That comparison made my stomach twist. I thought I'd raised her better. A few days passed. She didn't call. Not even a text. Normally she'd check in, even if it was just to ask if I could water her plants while she traveled. But this time, nothing. So I decided not to call either. Silence can be powerful. At first, it's lonely. Then it becomes a kind of mirror. Every quiet hour forced me to sit with what she said, and with the truth that maybe I had let life shrink around me. But you know what? I realized something. I didn't stop living because I wanted to. I stopped because I was tired of giving everything and getting nothing back. My husband died. My job downsized me out. My daughter grew up and barely looked back. I just disappeared quietly. That's not pathetic. That's grief. By the end of the week, I stopped looking in the mirror like I was a lost cause. I started cleaning. Not the usual tidying, I mean really cleaning. Closets, attic, old photo boxes. I found a letter Emily wrote when she was 11. "Mommy, I want to be just like you when I grow up." I sat on the floor and cried until I could barely breathe. Then I wiped my face, folded the letter, and said out loud, "You will remember who I am." I didn't know what that meant yet, but it was the first time in years I felt a spark. A tiny, angry, beautiful spark. And that's when things started to change. That week felt like living inside a quiet storm. On the outside, everything looked calm. Same house, same routine, same cup of coffee every morning. But inside, something was moving, shifting. I didn't call Emily. I didn't text her either. I wanted to, every day. My hands would hover over my phone, and I'd imagine what I'd even say. "I'm sorry?" For what? For being old? For loving her too much? For not being the version of me she thought I should be? No, I wasn't doing that anymore. So instead, I kept myself busy. I went through the attic, sorted boxes I hadn't opened in years, found my old sewing machine. I used to make clothes, dresses for Emily, curtains for the house, even little stuffed animals when she was sick. I hadn't touched that thing since my husband died. When I set it up again, the motor made that familiar hum, and something inside me stirred. My hands still knew what to do. I stayed up that night sewing until my back hurt. When I looked at the clock, it was 2:14 a.m. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. I started walking every morning too, just around the neighborhood. The first few days, I caught my reflection in shop windows, hunched shoulders, tired face. But by day 4, I was standing taller. A man at the cafe smiled at me. I smiled back. Funny, isn't it? All that change, and she hadn't even noticed. On Thursday, Emily finally texted, "Hey, Mom, haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" I stared at it for a long time. The old me would have replied instantly, pretending everything was fine. But this time, I let her wait. I didn't owe her a quick answer. Hours later, I wrote back, "I'm fine, just busy." That was it. Nothing more. No begging for her attention. No asking when she'd visit. I hit send, and it felt like reclaiming a small part of myself. She didn't reply. And honestly, that was fine. By the weekend, I went downtown for the first time in months. I wandered through an art fair, bought myself a cheap ring from a local vendor, and had lunch alone at a cafe. Alone, but not lonely. There's a difference I hadn't understood before. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and the sound of crickets. I thought about Emily. I still loved her. God knows that never changes. But I also realized something uncomfortable. I'd built my whole life around being her mother. And somewhere along the way, I forgot I was a person too. That realization didn't make me sad. It made me determined. Because the next time she saw me, I wasn't going to be the woman she could call pathetic. Not anymore. The decision didn't come all at once. It crept up on me, like water slowly boiling. It was a Saturday morning. I'd just come back from my walk, sweaty and out of breath, but feeling lighter. I poured myself some coffee and sat by the kitchen window, the same spot where I used to wait for Emily to come home from school. That's when I realized how small my life had become. Every inch of this house screamed her name. The photos, the drawings she made, even the chipped mug she gave me for Mother's Day 15 years ago. My whole world was frozen in memories of her, and yet she barely looked back. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, more like a quiet, firm enough. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and searched. Adult continuing education programs. I didn't even know what I was looking for, just something. Something that reminded me I was still capable. I found a local community college offering certification courses in digital marketing. Funny enough, the same field Emily worked in. I hesitated. I hadn't taken a class in over 30 years. But then I thought of her words. "You're stuck. You don't do anything fine," I thought. "Watch me." The next day I enrolled. Paid for it myself. Classes started in 2 weeks. When the confirmation email came through, I sat there staring at it, my hands trembling. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental, like I'd just taken my first step out of the version of me she'd decided I was. That week, I also cleaned out the guest room, her old room. I packed away the posters, the trinkets, the stuffed animals she'd left behind. I folded her old clothes into a box labeled Memories and slid it into the closet. Then I repainted the walls a soft grey and set up a desk in the corner. My desk. It wasn't just about the class anymore. It was about reclaiming space. Physical, emotional, mental. When Emily called that Wednesday, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, Mom," she said, her tone casual. "Haven't talked to you in a bit." "I've been busy," I said. "Busy with what?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Just things." She laughed, a little too sharply. "You? Busy? What are you doing? Taking up knitting?" I felt that sting again, but this time I didn't shrink. "Actually, I enrolled in a course," I said calmly. "Digital marketing. Start soon silence, then a scoff." "Wait, seriously?" "Mom, that's cute, but—" "Don't," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Don't call it cute." She went quiet. For the first time in years, I had the upper hand, not out of spite, but out of truth. She had underestimated me for so long, she didn't even know how to respond when I stood up for myself. We ended the call awkwardly, but I didn't care. Because that night, as I sat at my new desk, surrounded by fresh paint and the smell of change, I made a promise to myself. I would never again let her, or anyone, decide my worth. And that promise? It was just the beginning of everything that came next. By the time my course started, I was nervous, really nervous, but excited too. I bought a cheap laptop, a new notebook, and a decent pair of reading glasses. Walking into that classroom on the first day, surrounded by people half my age, I felt like a fraud. But by the end of the first week, that feeling changed. The professor was kind. The material made sense. And when we broke into small groups, I realized something. I wasn't the slow one. I was the one who actually listened. Every night I'd come home tired but proud. I even caught myself smiling while making dinner, something I hadn't done in years. A few weeks later, I got an email from my instructor asking if I'd consider helping with a small project, a volunteer role for a local nonprofit that needed help with online fundraising. Me, helping with marketing. I couldn't believe it. I said yes, of course. The project went well. I threw myself into it. Late nights, long emails, learning new tools. It felt good to be needed again, but not as someone's mother or wife. Just me. Then, out of nowhere, Emily called. I hadn't heard from her in nearly a month. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice oddly tight. "You busy?" "A little," I said honestly. "I'm working on something." "Oh," a pause. "Listen, I got laid off." My heart dropped. "Oh, Emily." "I'm so sorry." "Yeah," she said with a bitter laugh. "Company downsized." Just like that, I wanted to reach through the phone and hug her, tell her everything would be okay. But something in her tone told me she wasn't calling for comfort. She was calling because she didn't know what else to do. After a long silence, she asked, "How's your little class thing going?" I smiled softly. "It's not little. It's going really well, actually. I'm helping a non-profit with their campaigns." She didn't say anything for a while. I could almost hear her processing it. Then finally, "Wow, you actually stuck with it?" "I did," I said, "and I love it." It wasn't meant to sting her, but I could hear something shift in her voice, a mix of surprise and maybe embarrassment. "That's great, Mom," she said quietly. "Really." We talked a little more after that. She asked if she could come by next week, said she wanted to catch up. I agreed. When I hung up, I sat in silence, thinking about how strange it all was. The girl who once called me pathetic was now looking at me differently, maybe for the first time in years. But what she didn't know was that by the time she came over, things would be even more different. Because the very next day, I got another email from the non-profit director. They wanted to hire me part-time. Paid work. I stared at the screen, hand trembling, heart pounding. After all those years of feeling useless, I finally had something that was mine. And I couldn't help but think, when Emily walked through that door again, she'd be meeting a version of me she never expected to see. Emily came over the following Sunday. I almost didn't recognize her when she walked in. Her hair was pulled back messily, eyes puffy, no makeup. She looked exhausted. It hit me then. My daughter wasn't invincible. She was hurting, maybe more than she wanted to admit. "Hey," she said, forcing a smile. "You look nice." It was the first time she'd complimented me in years. I was wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater, nothing special, but I suppose it was different from the old robe she'd mocked before. "Thank you," I said gently. "Come in." She looked around the house, as if seeing it for the first time. The walls were freshly painted, the clutter was gone, and in the corner of the living room sat my new desk with the laptop open, a few notes pinned neatly beside it. "What's all this?" she asked, pointing to the desk. "My workspace," I said. "I got hired part-time by the non-profit I told you about." Her eyebrows shot up. "Wait, you're working?" "Yes," I said, smiling a little. "From home, mostly. They said I have a knack for storytelling and engagement." She blinked, like she didn't know what to say. "Wow, Mom, that's really impressive." I could hear the disbelief hiding behind her tone, but also something else. Admiration. Or maybe guilt. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd called me pathetic. The silence between us wasn't angry anymore, just heavy. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't mean what I said that night," she whispered. I looked at her, calm but firm. "Yes, you did. You may not mean it now, but you did then." Tears filled her eyes. "I was stressed. I was angry. I don't know, Mom. Everything was going wrong, and you were talking about that stupid chicken and—" She stopped mid-sentence, pressing her hands to her face. God, I'm such an awful person. I reached across the table and touched her wrist. "You're not awful, Emily. You're just human. But words matter. You cut me deep that night." She nodded, sobbing quietly. "I know. I hate that I said it. When you didn't call me after, it scared me. I thought maybe I pushed you too far." "You did," I said softly. "But maybe I needed that push." She looked up at me, confused. "It made me realize how much of myself I'd lost trying to be everything for everyone," I said. "I had nothing left that was just mine. But now I do, and I'm not giving that up again." She nodded slowly, tears streaming down. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I really am. It took everything in me not to cry too. Because despite all the pain, all the words I'd replayed over and over in my head, hearing that from her, it meant something. We sat there for a long time. No need to fill the silence. She stayed for dinner. We laughed, awkwardly at first, then freely. For a moment, it felt like years ago, before life hardened both of us. When she left, she hugged me tightly. "You're not pathetic," she whispered. "You're kind of amazing." After she drove off, I stood at the window watching her taillights fade. I should have felt peace, and I did partly, but another feeling lingered too. It was the quiet, steady understanding that no matter how much she apologized, something fundamental had shifted between us, not in a bitter way, but in a grown-up way. She finally saw me, not as her mother, but as a woman. And maybe, for the first time, I saw myself that way too. It's been 6 months since that day at the kitchen table, and my life doesn't look anything like it used to. My mornings start with coffee and a full inbox, not just junk mail, but real messages from people who value what I do. I manage 3 non-profit campaigns now. I have deadlines, meetings, even stress sometimes, but it's a good kind of stress, the kind that means you matter. The house feels lighter too. Not because I redecorated, but because the energy shifted. It's mine again. Every corner reflects who I am now, strong, busy, alive. Emily visits often, not out of obligation, but because she wants to. She asks about my work, sometimes even for advice. The irony still makes me smile. My daughter, the one who once told me I was too old to understand anything, now calls me for guidance. One night, a few weeks ago, we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. She said, "You've changed, Mom. You seem happy." "I am," I told her. "Happier than I've been in a long time." She smiled, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe awe. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you like this." I nodded. It took me a long time to see me too. We sat quietly after that. Sometimes healing doesn't need more words. What she doesn't know, what no one really knows, is that I applied to go full-time with the non-profit. They offered me a position leading their outreach program. Me, a 58-year-old woman who once thought her life was already over. When I signed the contract, I thought about that dinner, the one that started it all. Her words had gutted me then. But now, looking back, I almost feel grateful for them. They forced me to confront the version of myself I was too afraid to admit existed, the one who had stopped dreaming. I won't say everything between us is perfect. It's not. She still talks too fast, still rolls her eyes sometimes, still forgets I'm not fragile anymore. But now, when she does, I smile instead of shrink. Because I know who I am now. Not the mother who waits for her daughter's approval, not the widow who lost her spark, but the woman who found herself after everyone else stopped looking. Last week, Emily sent me a text out of the blue. It said, "I told Ryan, you're my biggest inspiration." I stared at it for a long time before replying, "Thank you, sweetheart." You helped me find my way there, because in a strange, painful, beautiful way, she did. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and looked around the quiet house, the same one where I once stood alone feeling invisible. Now, every silence feels earned. Every breath feels like proof that it's never too late to start over. And as I turned out the lights and headed to bed, I whispered to myself, not out of pride, but simple truth. I am not pathetic. I am finally me.